If I said to you 2 years ago, Donald Trump will win the popular vote and the Electoral College and the Senate and the House and the White House, you'd have thought I was stark raving bonkers. You'd have bet your house, you'd have bet your family, you'd have bet every penny you own that could never happen. You've been all caught napping at the wheel, right? You fell asleep at the wheel and you let him drive by and take the whole shebang. I think Democrats should take a long, hard look in the mirror and admit you've just been completely pounded into total, shameful, humiliating oblivion. And you've got to start again. And you've got to find politicians that actually resonate with the American people. And it's not the current shower you've got. Sorry.
So, Piers, in 2020, would you have said the same thing about the Republican Party that lost by a 4.5% margin nationally?
No.
Well, there you go. That's your cognitive
dissonance. No, because I felt the 2020...
If you are looking for the definition of cognitive dissonance, it's Piers Morgan calling Trump's popular vote margin of 1.5% an example of Democrats getting pounded into total, shameful, humiliating oblivion. But when I asked if that means that Trump's 4.5% popular vote loss back in 2020 was an example of the same thing, his response was, quote, no. I gotta say, I sometimes get jealous of Trump world's inability or unwillingness to recognize the asymmetry on display. This is an example of exactly that. In fact, the most ironic part of all of this is that Trump's popular vote margin was among the smallest in the last century. Only 4 other presidents have won with smaller popular vote margins, and one of them was Trump himself in 2016, meaning Trump's margin is the smallest since the last Republican president, George W. Bush, won in the year 2000, having lost the popular vote. And besides that, you'd have to go back to 1968 when Richard Nixon won to find a popular vote margin that small. All of which is to say, perhaps the right should moderate their use of the word mandate. And let's be clear, none of this is to say that Trump didn't win or that the Democrats shouldn't have some humility or introspection here, because we should. And if you've watched my videos, you know that I have been nothing but introspective over the last few weeks, figuring out ways that we can get better. Let's not delude ourselves into thinking that we're perfect and that we shouldn't change anything. We absolutely should. But perhaps that same humility should be extended to those on the right who, per usual, are treating Trump's minuscule victory as if he's the second coming of Christ, and that we've never seen a landslide this big. Again, a better metric would be that we rarely see popular vote victories this small. But look, we shouldn't be surprised that Republicans are taking a victory lap. We'd be doing the same thing. Perhaps the silver lining here, though, is that while Republicans take their slim victory as some mandate to enact a sweeping far-right Christo-fascist agenda with no need to moderate their worst impulses, the stage will then be set for Democrats to win out in midterms, not unlike exactly what happened in 2018 after Republicans swept in 2016 with Trump at the top of the ticket there as well. And let's be clear, we will 100% need a stronger Democratic Party with a stronger media ecosystem to be able to capitalize in midterms, but the attitude that we're seeing from the right doesn't exactly suggest that they're interested in appealing to the center. Here's another moment from the Piers Morgan debate. Look, going back to Nancy Mace, she explains on a weekly basis how she was the victim of sexual assault, including in this very previous segment with you. And yet, and to that point, I feel for her, and I think that's absolutely also awful. But she also breathlessly supports somebody like Donald Trump, who is an adjudicated rapist and who was credibly accused of sexual assault by 26 different women. So the cognitive dissonance at play here, first of all, is incredible. But second of all, just with regard to Nancy Mace, with regard to Donald Trump, we know why they're doing this. Nancy Mace is not afraid of Sarah McBride chasing her into the bathroom. She's not. She wants to fundraise off this. She wants to be social media famous. She wants to be... Nancy Mace has more ambition to be famous online than every single member of Jersey Shore.
Doesn't mean she's wrong.
That was in response to Nancy Mace's desperate, breathless, fawning pursuit of fame at the expense of an incoming trans member of Congress, Sarah McBride. To be clear, Mace doesn't know Sarah McBride. Mace is certainly not afraid of Sarah McBride. But she saw an opening in the wake of a presidential election where Trump found success vilifying trans people to get some attention of her own by attacking this new member of Congress for the crime of existing. Now she's claiming that she's now afraid of sharing a bathroom, and so now Sarah McBride has to be banned. And if you've had the misfortune of listening to any of Nancy Mace's past comments, you'll note that she repeats ad nauseum the fact that she was the victim of sexual assault herself. First of all, sexual assault is not a justification to attack other people, or worse, to claim that they're perpetrators of sexual assault just because you don't like them. And in fact, wielding your trauma as a weapon to attack other people only cheapens what is otherwise a horrific and tragic occurrence. Second of all, If Nancy Mace was truly as concerned about the prospect of sexual assault as she claims to be, especially for this member of Congress who's done nothing wrong, then maybe she'd have been even 1% as reticent to vote for the guy who she breathlessly supports for president, Donald Trump. That guy is credibly accused of sexual assault by 26 different women and is an adjudicated rapist according to a judge. And yet, according to Mace, that all seems totally fine, but Sarah McBride, who, as far as I can tell, has behaved herself with nothing other than grace and class, merely existing, well, that's apparently a bridge too far for Nancy Mace. So I guess the question for Mace is this: is sexual assault okay only when Republicans do it? But it's not just Mace's desperation to get some social media fame, which, to be clear, is her driving force. It is why she wakes up in the morning. It's also part of a broader goal within the Republican Party by wielding culture as a distraction from their abhorrent policy positions. And in fact, Sarah McBride herself made that point quite succinctly.
I think we are all united that attempts to attack a vulnerable community are not only mean-spirited, but really an attempt to misdirect. Because every single time we hear the incoming administration or Republicans in Congress talk about any vulnerable group in this country, we have to be clear that it is an attempt to distract. It is an attempt to distract from what they are actually doing. Every single time we hear them say the word trans, look what they're doing with their right hand. Look at what they're doing to pick the pocket of American workers, to fleece seniors by privatizing Social Security and Medicare. Look what they're doing, undermining workers. And here's also what we have to be clear about, because I think the last week has been a prime example of this. Every bit of time and energy that is used to divert the attention of the federal government to go after trans people is time and energy that is not focused on addressing the cost of living.
And we saw this strategy at play not only in this election, but just about every election in my lifetime. Republicans know that their policies are unpopular. They can't run on denying climate change, or kowtowing to fossil fuel companies, or banning abortion, or cutting taxes just for the ultra-wealthy, but they can find a shiny culture war issue to exploit. Remember when it was gay marriage a few years back? And then it became migrant caravans where people are coming into this country to rape your wives and sell drugs to your kids. And now suddenly it's trans Americans. There is always some marginalized group of people that's to blame for everybody else's problems. And so if you're mad, according to Republicans, it's clearly because the government isn't focused on you. They're focused on gay people or trans people or brown people. But the Republicans know that a government that recognizes the humanity of gay or trans or brown people is not why people feel left behind in this country. In reality, people feel left behind because the government doesn't work for working class people of any gender or ethnicity or nationality or sexual orientation. Starting in 1980, Republicans implemented trickle-down economics. And since that moment, as you can see in this chart, income inequality exploded in this country. That was effectively the death of the middle class in America. Republicans wage culture wars so that the rest of us don't wage class wars against the very people responsible for entrenching and exacerbating this very system. Republicans here are basically convincing people making $75,000 a year that people making $7.50 an hour are the problem, so that nobody pays attention to people making millions of dollars per year. You are not poor because trans people can use bathrooms. You are not poor because gay people are able to use bathrooms. You're not poor because brown people exist in this country. You are poor because the government offers you crumbs while heaping every advantage under the sun to the ultra-rich. And I don't know who needs to hear this, but putting Elon Musk, the literal richest man in the world and a staunch opponent of the working class and unions, in charge of the government is not going to make it any better. Just like how Trump's first term proved that he didn't give a shit about the working class when he passed a tax cut solely intended to help millionaires and billionaires. But they also know that so long as they can distract you by shouting about trans people, then you'll fall for it. That is how much disdain they have for their own audience. They know that they just have to wave around something shiny and no one will realize that they're getting fucked by those very people. Granted, at this point, with the election over, we likely won't be able to stop it, but we can certainly call it out when it happens. And it will happen, because if there's one thing we know about Trump, it's that the people in office are not there to help Americans, but to help himself, his family, and his donors. And just like the first time, that's exactly what he's going to do. Before you go, just a quick note, if you'd like to see more of my content, which is always free of advertising, sponsorships, and paywalls, please make sure to subscribe to this channel using the subscribe button right here on the screen. And if you'd like to support my work even further, you can grab a copy of my instant #1 New York Times selling book, Shameless, available for sale right now. That link is also on the screen. Thanks so much for watching.